Welcome into another BPTV. Cory McCartney and Grant McAuley with you. And I've come here a la Kurt Loder in MTV Newsdays, urging Braves fans to rock the vote for the All-Star Game. But clearly they've got that covered. A whopping 5 Braves are in the top 2 at their position during phase 1 of the voting, which goes through June 22nd. A year after getting one starter, Grant, Braves country is flexing its muscle.
Yeah, it certainly is. I mean, and you're looking at a team that seems to be kind of coming into its own despite numerous injuries and other issues and inconsistency in different places that has required other players to step up and step in. But there have been some all-star performances on this team. There's really just no way around that. Ronald Acuña Jr., the top vote getter in all of Major League Baseball, the only player with more than 1 million votes at the first balloting reveal, ahead of a guy like Shohei Ohtani. That's saying something about Ronald Acuña Jr.'s star power, how much it is apparent, I think, to the rest of baseball, and the fact that at 25 years old, rumors of his demise were greatly exaggerated. I would think after a season in which he had to battle that knee, he has looked like just an absolute flat-out five-tool superstar who's capable of doing things that nobody in baseball has done before when it comes to home runs and stolen bases in the same season. But we can talk more about Ronald Acuña Jr. later. There are more than one capable and very viable candidates for the All-Star Game wearing a Braves uniform this year.
Well, I do want to say, though, I mean, Acuña is the mayor of Majorsstown. You mentioned it, leading all players, and only won over 1 million votes so far. He was a leading vote getter a year ago, and the reason I think that's so crucial is the only time that the Braves have done that was Hank Aaron in 1970 and 71. The only other Braves to lead in votes in the All-Star Game were Dale Murphy in 85 and Freddie Freeman in 2018. So it's a popularity contest. Acuña currently tracking to be the homecoming king. But meanwhile, Sean Murphy leads all catchers. Ozzie Albies is second at second base. Orlando Arcia is tops at shortstop. Austin Riley is second at third base. Things could still change for the likes of Matt Olson, Michael Harris II, Marcell Ozuna, Travis d'Arnaud, who were still on the ballot during this first phase of voting. But we know so much of this is driven by 2 things: a team's fan base and the popularity of a team outside their fan base. The Braves, obviously one of the most exciting teams in baseball, one of the deepest lineups in the game. They check a lot of boxes when it comes to taking over all-star voting. If you're forecasting how many Braves are making the cut and earning a place in Seattle.
Yeah, they certainly do. And I don't know that we can continue to just say, hey, it's the TBS effect, but it doesn't hurt when your club has been able to establish a fan base that pretty much runs coast to coast across baseball. And I think at a time like this, you continue to see that the Braves have some far-reaching popularity. Ronald Acuña Jr. makes his own case on the field, but I wouldn't imagine that it hurts at all to have fans all across the country voting for who is one of the most exciting young players in baseball. And then obviously seeing what the rest of this team's doing, sitting around with the best record in the National League. The fans love winning, so that's one of the things that can help drive the voting as well. And I think that the Braves' popularity is always going to be something that will factor in when this team is running on all cylinders, or at least at the top of the National League East. It's going to get some attention.
I think 3 are a given, but I think you can make a case for 5 before we even get to the pitchers, which could make that number even bigger. Acuña, obviously, a shoe-in. Murphy leads all NL catchers in F4. Albies is tied for the home run lead at second. If Luis Arraez wasn't having the year that he was for the Marlins, I'd say Albies would start, but I think he's got a nice lead on Albies right now. Third base has been such a tough nut to crack in the National League with Nolan Arenado and Manny Machado. Machado, though, is in the midst of his least productive season of his career. Riley may not surpass Arenado, who is the gold standard of the position, but a second straight all-star nod is in the cards, especially I think with him heating up at the right time. But the new logjam, it's in the National League's at first base, and I think Matt Olson could end up being the odd man out here. Freddie Freeman, Paul Goldschmidt, Pete Alonso. Olson is 4th in F4 and weighted run created plus, 6th in F4. I just can't see him breaking through there. And we haven't even talked about the pitchers yet, where Spencer Strider, who has had a couple of rough outings, still leads the most with the most strikeouts. Bryce Elder is 3rd in ERA. Jesse Chavez, who obviously, was carted off the field in a scary incident that isn't going to be quite as scary as we maybe thought, is 4th in ERA among relievers. Of course, pitchers are not among those voted on. Something I've never truly understood, but I digress. I think the Braves are going to be well represented, though, during the All-Star voting here during this process.
Yeah, I think they will. I mean, at least on the fan vote. I can't necessarily make a case for, every other Brave starter getting the nod as a reserve. I mean, there just are going to be limits to how big the roster is and what other teams are doing. The story for Luis Arraez, flirting with 400, there's not too many guys that do that, even this deep into a season. So that certainly got some attention. And the Marlins are a pretty solid club this year, and he's one of the good stories that they've had down there. But I would still think Ozzie Albies gets the opportunity to go to the All-Star game, particularly if he's rolling into the midway portion of the season, maybe lead the National League in RBI because he's pretty close to it after knocking in 3 more in the first game against the Rockies. So he's got a really good case. First base, as you mentioned, I would be a little surprised if Matt Olson makes it. But then again, different guys, injuries, other players bow out, and there are some alternates and things that are done over the course of the days and weeks leading up to the All-Star game. But, Matt's having a solid season, but one of those that I think is just, it's not exactly what he wants it to be. And when you're facing off against Freddie Freeman and a former MVP and Paul Goldschmidt as well at that position, and then Pete Alonso, certainly you mentioned, has kind of been the driving force, maybe the only driving force in the Mets lineup all year long. He's dealing with an injury, but should be back at that point. It's just kind of hard to make a big case that any of the Braves are further down in the voting than they should be, or that they have a better case for the All-Star game. You take 3 or 4 guys, I think it's a pretty good one. Pitching staff, I think that'll come into focus more so as we get into the month of July.
A reminder that players need to be in the top 2 at the position to advance, and then voting totals are reset when we get to phase 2, which runs from June 26th to the 29th. Regardless, the Braves figure to be well represented a year after putting 6 players in the All-Star game. That was their most since 2011. Grant, at 20 years old, I could barely make it to an 8 a.m. class in college, let alone coming off my first big league win like AJ Smith-Shawver. It just picked up against the Rockies on Thursday. At 20 years, 207 days, he gave up 3 runs over 5 2/3 against the Rockies in the Braves' 8-3 win. Colorado got to him for 2 home runs, but Smith-Shawver's fastball averaged 94.5, topping out at 96.8. He got 17 whiffs on the 55 swings that they took against him over 99 pitches. That included 6 for 6 against a changeup, a 40% whiff rate on his curveball. And that may have been the most impressive part of his outing, because when he faced the Nationals in his first start on June 9th, they had 6 whiffs on 37 swings. This was a very good arsenal that Smith-Shawver showed. And we talked about this when Michael Soroka came up during his brief run. The fact that Kyle Wright has now been cleared with no timetable, Max Fried not throwing off a mound yet, it's still a good month before he gets back. Wright may be until August. This rotation needs multiple guys to step up. This was not a conversation we thought we'd be having, but clearly an opportunity that Smith-Shawver can take advantage of.
Yeah, I mean, he's risen through the ranks so quickly, and the reason why is because I think of the stuff, the arsenal that he has, and we saw it on display against the Colorado Rockies. He was getting those swings and misses. The fastball was more lively. He used his secondaries, was not afraid to throw them in fastball counts, and I think having guys like Sean Murphy and Travis d'Arnaud behind the plate for him is also going to help him take that big leap forward. I talked to Brian Snitker about that, and he said, look, you cannot overstate how important those guys behind the plate are for the success of our pitching staff. And when you've got a 20-year-old, breaking into the majors, even with the arm and the talent that AJ Smith-Shawver has, you definitely want somebody to kind of shepherd him through some of the highs and lows that can come first, second, and maybe third time through an order, as the case may be for a starter. That last part is pretty important. But I thought it was great to see him kind of get through the 5th inning where he didn't get a call that went his way. So it was the only walk he had in that game. It made him throw a lot more pitches. In fact, 35 total in that 5th inning. But he came back out for the 6th, and afterwards, after getting a couple of quick outs, Michael Tonkin came in and closed out the rest of the game. But Brian Snitker said after the game, kind of wish I'd given him that one more batter. Maybe I should have. And maybe next time, AJ Smith-Shawver has done something here where it shows you, I can give this kid just a little bit more. And that's definitely what you want to see, just that process of getting himself comfortable, showing what he's capable of doing, and then earning a little bit more trust as you go along. And you're right. There's nobody walking through the door next week in terms of returns from the injured list. Kyle Wright is going to start throwing very soon. And you've got Max Fried nearing his mound work. That's something that's good to see, but it's still going to be weeks, if not another month or so, before we see Max Fried back on the mound for the Atlanta Braves if everything goes well. So AJ Smith-Shawver is in a position to really make an impact for the Braves rotation and make quite an impression for himself as far as the future job opportunities go for him in this Braves rotation as well.
Yeah, and I'm fascinated to see this where this goes with him. And clearly, as we mentioned, there's opportunities here. And then the flip side of things with this rotation, Spencer Strider was looking like a Cy Young contender. The fastball velocity has been a tick off of late. He allowed 5 home runs and 13 runs in total his last 2 times out against the Mets and Tigers. Obviously, this is still a guy with some fantastic stuff, but what's the concern level over these last couple starts out of what we've seen from Spencer Strider?
Yeah, there has to be some, at least, because it just hasn't been working quite the same for him. He gets some strikeouts, but pitch counts very high. The home run ball has become a problem for him. 13 runs over the course of 9 innings in his last 2 starts. Fastball velocity hasn't been quite what you want to see at times. I know that you can kind of play with that from the mid to the high 90s, but there hasn't been as much of that high 90s for Spencer Strider lately, and I'm not sure maybe what the reasoning is for that, because there was a time at the start of the year where it seemed like he was kind of content to go around 96, 97 miles an hour, and that was going to be where he operated. Then if he needed the big fastball, he kind of felt like he had it in his back pocket. Then there was that start where Rick Kranitz came out and said, look, you got to make an adjustment here. And he started throwing harder and said, you know what, maybe I shouldn't have been ramping it down all along. Maybe I should just use a little bit more because I needed that to get through. And that's the style of pitcher that he is. So there are going to be some different things that he's going to have to adjust over the course of his career. I'm not saying that he should start throwing his changeup 30% of the time, but he only throws it 5 or 6 times typically per start. Maybe a few more of those well placed. I know it's his third best pitch, and there's an argument to be made. Don't get beat on your second best pitch or your third best pitch. If you're going to get beat on your first. But you'd also like to not get beat. And I do think that there's some sequencing and maybe a little bit of a key to help him get through this at the moment that could maybe reimagine things a little bit and give hitters something else to think about as well. I do think he has the arsenal. And if he can find the velocity, the consistent velocity that he needs, the slider's a wipeout pitch. That's one he's going to get lots of swings and misses on as well. But he does the 2-pitch thing about as well as anybody. But that third pitch every once in a while might just kind of be the key to helping Spencer Strider get through this particular challenge that he's going through right now, because it does seem like he's in a bit of a rut.
Well, we knew at some point he was going to have a challenge. It wasn't always going to be this easy for Spencer Strider, and we're clearly in the midst of it, the first real challenge of his major league career. After taking the series opener on Thursday, the Braves continue their series against the Rockies with another one of those young arms who are looking to provide some stability. Taking the ball Friday as Jared Schuster goes opposite Dennis Lamet. Saturday is Bryce Elder against Connor Siebold, and the series wraps Sunday with Charlie Morton and Chase Anderson. This is a bad Rockies starting staff. They have the third worst ERA in the majors, second worst in the NL at 5.83. I'm going to go out on a limb here with the majors F4 leader, but Ronald Acuña Jr. is going to do some further damage in this series. He has an OPS over 1,100 against the Rocky staff, and the 2 aforementioned starters he's already faced, Lamet and Anderson. He's taken them both deep before. And to take it a step further, the Giants are the only NL pitching staff that has allowed a higher hard hit rate. Acuña has been a hard hit machine, 55% to be exact on the season, has 10 more hard hit balls than any player in the game. I look to the highlights are going to just keep coming from Acuña in this series.
Yeah, I would think so. And I think we've all heard the stat over the last 24 to 48 hours that Ronald Acuña Jr. has more hard hit balls than 23 other teams, if I heard that stat correctly. If not, then feel free to drop it in the comments if I've misinterpreted that. But let me just go ahead and tell you, Ronald Acuña Jr. is going to hit the ball hard. That is not a spoiler. That is a prediction. It's a promise. It's all of the things that we've come to know and appreciate about Ronald Acuña Jr. is the consistency of how he puts that ball in play and does so at the hardest rate of anybody in Major League Baseball. One thing I'm interested to see in this series, not only what Ronald can do, but Ozzie Albies getting the opportunity to bat second in that opener. Brian Snitker indicated that may be a place where he's going to try it out for a little while, which allows Matt Olson to drop down in the order just a bit. I think that could be good for a couple of different reasons. Number one, Ozzie's been swinging the bat so well of late. Of course, he hits great right-handed, but left-handed, his swing has looked so good over the last 3 to 4 weeks, and he's finding the consistency that he wants to have. That makes him a nice fit, I think, at the 2 spot. And when you think about Matt Olson's struggles, particularly with the strikeouts, maybe take a little bit of pressure off of him, still having him in a run-producing spot in the middle of the order like he hit 5th on Thursday, and letting him kind of swing through some of this without it being a focal point, if you will, at the top of the order, right behind Ronald Acuña Jr., as it was for the first 68 games, because it's been going this way for a while for Matt, where he's kind of turned into this 3 true outcomes player. And I do feel like he's a better hitter than that, and had been a better hitter than that when the Braves acquired him from Oakland and had that career year in 2021, where it just seemed like he was so well balanced. There weren't too many strikeouts. He did draw his walks. He's going to hit his home runs. It's just kind of getting back, I think, to a nice even level for him is what he's trying to find so that he can kind of get his season on track, cut down the strikeouts, and continue to give the Braves the run production they need, and maybe find some hits with runners in scoring position. I know he's been looking for those as well. Maybe this is a good spot for him to find all of those by just changing a couple of things up in the Braves lineup, which, as you mentioned earlier in the show, is one of, if not the deepest in all the National League.
Well, it helped him last year and got him ready for a really nice finish to the season before he was one of the few guys that absolutely tore it up in the NLDS against the Phillies. Braves will want to keep that momentum going, though. The Phillies are on the docket coming up with a road trip, and then they got the Mets to follow. So make sure, as always, to follow if you're not already. Hit that subscribe button on the Battery Power YouTube channel. Turn on those notifications. That's the only way that you'll get an alert each and every time that we drop a new episode. Until next time, I'm Cory McCartney. He's Grant McAuley, and we'll see you soon, Braves Country.